Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. We are back with another Neurodiversity Stories, and let's put my teeth back in. Another Neurodiversity Stories, and we have another incredible guest, an absolute, a remarkable person who's doing some incredible work in this space, and also coming to share her story. So Coral Campbell will be sharing her story around her diagnosis. She is a quality officer in the NHS and was diagnosed with dyslexia at the age of 18 and still waiting assessment for the ADHD, but is going to be talking about an incredible story. So please stay around and join in with this, because we're absolutely thrilled to have her time. Very, very busy person. Also, guys, we can't do this without you, so please do let us know where you're tuning in from. We are reaching lots of different countries, from America to India to Australia. I think the Australia may be on the replay, maybe with the time difference. But again, we are doing some phenomenal work in helping to raise awareness. I want to also say thank you to all of our sponsors that have sponsored this show previously. They've really helped the channel grow. And I want to say a massive thank you to our current sponsor, which is Sweet Social Media. Please do check out this. Are you looking for a social media company that hits the sweet spot? Then please do check out our sponsors, Sweet Social Media, who do incredible work from online training to in-person training to running and managing your social media marketing to get you seen by many, many more businesses. If you comment below Sweet Social Media, you will get a 15% discount on one of their packages. Please do check them out, and thank you so much for being our sponsors. So guys, that's Sweet Social Media, our sponsor. Please do check them out. So without further ado, again, I know people are commenting. Great. So if you're watching this on the replay, then please do, again, feel free to ask any questions, or we'll do our very best to get to these. And also, please do comment again whereabouts in the world you are tuning in from. So without further ado, I would love to introduce you to our guest, Coral, who, again, is going to be, we're just going to have a conversation about her journey around dyslexia and the incredible work that she's doing. So please sit back, relax, make yourself comfy, and let's welcome Coral. Good morning, Coral.
Hi, you're right.
Very well, thank you. Thank you so much for taking time out of your day to talk to us at Neurodiversity Stories. It's absolutely thrilled. When you reached out and said that you would like to be a guest, I was thrilled because of the incredible work that you're doing. So a massive thank you for that.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
No problem at all. Coral, if I can kind of just take you back to, because you mentioned with regards to your dyslexia, this was kind of well, I say at an early age of 18. It's not in some aspects in that sense, but what was that kind of period like pre the diagnosis of dyslexia? What was that kind of like?
So the dyslexia diagnosis almost didn't happen. Um, Basically, all of the little computer system programs that we use to flag dyslexia in education, I never got flagged. My reading was always quite ahead of it. I never had any of the classic signs of words jumping around or anything like that. And it was in college, and I was really struggling with concentrating, even on subjects that I really enjoyed. And so I asked for help, and I thought it was ADHD. I went for an ADHD assessment, or I asked for an ADHD assessment because that was also something that they brought up when I was about 3, 5, 7. That ADHD would look like it was playing a part in my life. So I went in and I had the full assessment, and I came out with a dyslexia diagnosis, which was really, really surprising for me. Again, because I was an avid reader, I never had any struggles in what I thought dyslexia was. Um, and interestingly, the report highlighted very, very similar traits to ADHD, which is that concentration, executive dysfunction, organization. I remember one thing where you'd say, I'd tell a story, and a neurotypical person, it wasn't called that back then, but someone who wasn't dyslexic would say, this happened and this happened and this happened. It'd be very linear. And for me, it was this happened. Oh, and then this happened. And oh, and then this happened. So the traits are very similar, but I didn't come back with an ADHD diagnosis, which the I now know there is a reason for that, which I think is quite important for a lot of people who are still living at home, who are young and have a lot of support. But it really helped in the sense of I started getting accommodations in education from that point, and then when I went to uni and they have disabled student allowance, that allowed me to access that support, which I wouldn't have been able to access without that diagnosis.
It's fascinating, isn't it? That you so dyslexia wasn't really on the radar
Not
as
at all.
such. It was, and then it was actually that. So that was. Did you then have to kind of go on a sort of a self journey, I guess, of understanding what dyslexia actually is and how it can kind of relate?
Yeah, yeah, so it was yeah, so I was quite young and I just didn't think about anything any kind of learning difficulties at all until college. Because I was studying psychology, so maybe that helped. But I really enjoyed psychology, but I was just really struggling and I actually repeated my first year of college. Um and I still didn't actually come out with fantastic grades in my A levels, but it was a few things started making sense. The organization difficulties and time management difficulties and the yeah going off on tangents and even maths actually. So maths came up. I was always really good at maths, and when I explained my process, part of the dyslexia assessment, they take you through working out sums as well. And the way I work out sums is quite different. So if I was trying to add 17 to something, for example, I'd add 10, 5, and 2. That kind of thing. I'd split it up in a quite a different way. And I never knew my full times tables, despite the fact that I was quite good at maths. So anything that was times 10, it'd be times 5, and then times, and then I'd add them together, that kind of process. So it was really interesting to see that. I'm sure like many of us, the way my brain worked was different to the majority of people, and I just thought everybody did it that way. So
That's but what's incredible, Coral, is that you managed to kind of create these strategies around things. So it may sound quite simple in in one aspect. Well, if I'm adding 17, then I go 10 and then 5 and then 2. But the, it's amazing how then you would implement that into other things with regards to the kind of the way that our brain work when it comes to dyslexia. I think that's really fascinating that we always trying to find different solutions around this and what works best for us.
mhm.
I think as well for me going to school and growing up, I always felt maths for me, I felt really tricky. The fact that someone could just reel off the times table, I could probably I could do a 2 and a 5 and a 10. It's probably the limit, but you start bringing in 7s and 8s and 9s, it
Mhm.
completely throws me out. And I think this is when we talk about dyslexia, and this is the scale, isn't it, that we're on. The gauge of dyslexia is my dyslexia would be different to your dyslexia, and your dyslexia would be different to someone else. So trying to I'll not say accommodate that, but to try and understand that from an outside perspective can be quite tricky. Would you say?
Yeah, it's a challenge that we have in work and in this space used all the time is I think it started in the autistic community. If you've met one autistic person, you've met one autistic person, and it goes across the whole spectrum of everything really. And that's what people they struggle to wrap their head around, but we're the sum of so many different parts of our lives. It's not just dyslexia, it's not just dyslexia and ADHD, it's our upbringing, it's our education. There's so many things that go into play in how we work and also what works for us depending on our circumstances, which change as well. So at different points in my life, different strategies for coping will have just changed, as I went into motherhood, when I was in university, as a single person, when I was living at home. How I coped with all of the difficulties I had will will vary throughout my life as an individual. So, everybody else is going to have the same variance as well.
It's really fascinating when you mention that, and it really brings it to light that it's not just dyslexia, it's circumstantial in the sense of, what was the education like, what's the home life like, what's the job, what's the stresses, what's the strains, what's the all the other aspects of this. And I think that's why it's so broad as well, to try and understand what do you think we could do more to kind of help and support and understand it? Do you think it's just more research around this, or it's more understanding or more conversations? Because
I think there's, yeah, sorry, do carry on.
no, please go on there.
There's a place for research. Obviously, I do a lot of research. Research is surprisingly one of my strong points. Something I've learned as I've grown up, and there is a place for it. And there's a lot of information we can gather from it. But it's so around neurodivergence, especially, but around health and healthcare, it's very, very narrow. A lot of research is undertaken for white males, boys, young kids, especially around neurodivergence. So although it's growing and we learn a lot from research, we are extremely limited if that's all we're learning from. So, really, the best place to learn is from speaking to people. So, these kind of things, find out what their experiences are. You'll get much broader understanding of those individual situations. You can bring gender into it, you can bring gender diversity into it, you can bring race into it. All of these kind of different intersectional identities are really important to understand, and we just don't have that broad spectrum of understanding in research alone. But it's a good place to start. So if you're ever going to go into a conversation with somebody, this is what I recommend. If you're working with someone who has lived experience that you're trying to understand and you don't have that lived experience, do the research first, get that basic understanding, because their job's not to teach you that basic stuff. Their job is to add nuance and depth and richness to that. So I think it's a good starting point, but it's definitely not where people should limit themselves. There's great books out there written by, neurodivergent people, and you learn a lot from them. But I've always found the most value is in speaking to people directly.
Absolutely, so wonderfully put. And I think, if you take, say, the workplace, and not all workplaces, because I know there's some just doing incredible things, and some are at different stages of journeys of understanding. And normally what happens, if someone goes into their workplace and they just, let's just take dyslexia for instance, they go into the workplace and they say, actually, I have dyslexia. The first thing they do is, what support do you need? And it's almost like, you educate me on what support you need from the work point of view. And you so elegantly mentioned as well that you need different support at different stages for different things. And I think if you're going into a new work space, you don't know what support you're going to need. You know what support you
Mhm.
needed where you were before, but it's quite a big question, isn't it? And I've the many people I've spoken to before, sometimes that happens, and you're almost put on the spot. It's what do you need? And it's almost, I may need something for this part, and then this may happen. I may need this, and that's where we're saying, I guess, it's that continuation of understanding.
Yeah, that's really important. And it's a piece of work that I'm trying to do where I am, is there's a set amount of, so when it comes to making reasonable adjustments, or I think a favored word in our place is accommodations, because the word reasonable is very subjective. But when you're making accommodations, the first thing you want to do is, if you're a manager, for example, is look at the environment, look at your structures and your processes are in place, and look at what barriers that you're putting up in the first place. So there's a whole load, and obviously there's different barriers you can take down depending on the workplace. So I work in the NHS. A hospital ward will have certain processes in that they have to have in, versus myself. I work remotely. I'm in the corporate side of things, and those things can be taken down a lot more easily. So it's looking at what you've got in place in the first instance that are imposing a barrier for people. I know a big one is lighting, for example. It's a really simple one, but if you've got really harsh lighting in offices, how can you take that away, get full spectrum lighting, make them dimmer? And generally, it tends to work for a lot of people, for everybody, a lot better anyway. Um, and then the conversation afterwards, when you meet somebody who says, I'm dyslexic, I'm ADHD, I'm autistic, if you've already got quite a big knowledge on, okay, these are some of the common barriers that people with this diagnosis face. So, for example, if it's autism, it could be social communication difficulties. How can you make things better as a standard and then go on it's a really cheesy way of saying it, but you're going to go on a journey with that person, especially as we are finding a lot more people are being diagnosed later on in life. They don't know what works for them. A lot of the time, they don't even know that they're functioning in a way that is not the most proficient for them, for their health, for their well-being. Until they start learning, actually, there's a different way we can do this that is much better for me. It's much better for my productivity. It's much better for my mental health, and we still end up with the same result. And that journey is one I'm going through myself. So I, mentioned that I was diagnosed dyslexic at 18, and thankfully, there's a lot of overlap between dyslexia and ADHD. But it's very highly likely that I am ADHD. Statistically, it's very highly likely, but also it's pretty obvious. And it was undiagnosed for up until now for multiple reasons that I can go into. But I'm working with my manager, going, should we try this out? Should we try this out? Should we try this out? Oh, that's not working. That didn't work. Oh, that worked really well. And then sometimes it works, and then sometimes it doesn't. And you have to, as an employee and as an employer, understand that that relationship is ongoing, and it might be frustrating, but it's frustrating for everybody. Like, any employees there wanting to do their job, they're like, why can't I just do it? And what can I do? And how can I make this better? And up until, you start working with them, the neurodivergent people, they're taking the brunt of that, because a lot of them are very scared to say, actually, I'm really struggling. I can't do this the way it's functioning. We're so scared of losing our jobs because we can't do our job within the structures that it currently sits under. But once you start finding ways of working to the way their brain works, they flourish. You end up with employees just doing a great job because it works for them. So
And it's remarkable, isn't it, that I see it as that journey, as we mentioned. You go on. It's almost setting the standards of how it can kind of for the next employee and the next employee and the next employee. I mean, how wonderful would it be? I mean, it's always difficult to put your head above the parapet and be that employee that has to bring to the table, I'm struggling with this, and this, with the worry that actually, are you not going to fit the job script description that they need? And that's not a nice feeling, to have that understanding from an organization to say, okay, let's go on this journey. Let's help and support within this side of it. So then we know, I mean, imagine that if you're doing this, then 3 years of that, the whole organization starts to really kind of understand, not just from a from a technical point of view, but from a lived experience. I mean, I guess that's the perfect thing, isn't it? That we're striving towards.
Yeah, I think the main thing is understanding it is, it's a long-term thing. And even in the world of equality, we're put under pressure to try and produce results very quickly. And the majority of the time, the work that we're doing, and this is included in it, is for the next cohort of people, the next generation, the next, employees that come in. And it's really hard to see the value of doing these things, because usually the value is minimal in the first instance, and then you really see it later down the line.
It's like an organization really kind of building the foundations of their
Mhm.
organization within this the side, the side of their business, and going, actually, well, if not just for the side of it, it's the whole of the business, to say, okay, how can we be more inclusive within this side of it, and then growing it. You mentioned as well about the lighting. It literally, as soon as you said it, I was going to say a light bulb went off, but it was just a cheesy thing that I just went through my mind. So even though I've just said it, so apologies for that. But genuinely, you're absolutely right. That harsh lighting. I remember back in my kind of corporate days, I've been in situations where I've gone into a meeting room that I know I'm going to be in the next couple of hours, and within the first 30 seconds, I'm struggling, purely just because of, the lighting. I spoke to a few people as well, and placement in where their desk is in offices can be a situation where their screen is facing out to everyone else, and it's not
Yeah,
because to just search the web or do not work, but it was when I spoke to them, they said, Darren, I write emails, and whenever I write, I get the red underline all the time. So when I look at my work, to me, I'm used to it, and I know this. But for every colleague that walks past and sees this, I feel uncomfortable, because
yeah,
I'll go through spell check, and I'll do all the other bits and pieces, and Grammarly, and it will work. But that instant when I'm writing an email, I'm always continuously looking over my shoulder, thinking, who's seeing it? And it's
yeah.
those those slight adjustments from an organization can have massive impact for the person working there.
But there's yeah, there's that's funny that one because what sprang to my head was this common difficulty that neurodivergent people have with being perceived, and I'm not entirely sure exactly whether there's a one reason why that is, but I know that I have a difficulty with it. I have difficulty of people seeing things in progress. I don't like people seeing draft work, when I've not finished it, when I've not finalized it, when I've not perfected it, because I don't like being seen as not good enough. And I think that that probably plays a part in it. With the statistically, I think it's I don't know, is it 10,000 negative comments by the age of 10 that neurodivergent people have received, something like that. And when you've had that many negative comments thrown at you, you are going to be conditioned to be like, I can't let people see this before I'm ready for them to see it. But it's such a small detail that I reckon there's a lot of people wouldn't even be aware of
Yeah.
is something that's actually a major issue or something that they could make a small change to and would have such a good positive effect that they wouldn't even think to bring it up,
Yeah,
I imagine.
no, it's remarkable when you start breaking down workplaces in sense. And I know we had with the pandemic, there was the turmoil that obviously everyone went through, and then bringing people back into the office, and that's changed the mindset and everything else. But standard workplaces, even a desk that's in line with people continuously walking past by a door, these distractions, all of these little things add up. And it's the things that play on your mind when you're getting on the train or the bus or the car to the journey into work, and you're thinking, as soon as I get in, and it could be small talk. I struggle with small talk.
So,
Uh, just
yeah.
genuinely struggle because I feel I have to remember. I have to remember, and it depending on who you're speaking to. If it's small talk, networking, or anything else like that, I do struggle in that sense.
Yeah.
But genuinely, if you imagine walking into the office, and your boss walks past and just starts having a conversation with you, and
Mm.
then just it adds a little, oh, and what are we doing on that project? In my mind, straight away, I'd be thinking, oh my goodness, I would just go completely blank and freeze. And it's those little, I guess, those boundaries, isn't it? Those little scenarios which we can kind of begin to start working towards to help.
It's really, yeah, it's so it's so funny that you mentioned that. It was a good few years ago. I worked for an advocacy service, and in one of my meetings with my manager, it was brought up that one of my colleagues had mentioned I don't say hi when they come into the office. So I was an admin at the time, and I was essentially front of house, but it was only for staff. There were no like service users or anything like that. Generally, very rarely who would access the office, and a lot of them were out for the majority of the day because they were out seeing service users. And it was brought up, and I was just shocked. I didn't even realize I wasn't doing it. And it was really upsetting because it comes across as rude. And that's kind of what I've been told. And I'd heard it before as well in within my family. Not it wasn't in an accusatory way, it was just an observation, but I've heard it multiple times in my life. And this isn't a work profession, and I'm being told by, these are advocates for, people under the Mental Health Act and the Care Act, and saying that it made them feel awkward and like there was something wrong, and it was just really difficult for me to process. And within sort of looking at my neurodivergency a lot more in the last just 2 years, I realized that I struggle with that process for multiple reasons. Of if I'm busy doing something, it's really hard for me to switch from that to the hello. If other people are there saying hi, my brain goes, oh, other people saying hi, I'll speak to them in a minute. I don't know when to interject if they come in talking straight away. And sometimes my brain just doesn't, it just doesn't. I hear it in my head. I'm like, oh, so and so's come in, and I'll speak to them in a bit, and I just don't. The words don't come out. And and I mentioned it in my workplace, in to our staff networks, as an experience that I had. And it's not that other people are being bad people by saying, oh, you don't say hi, and because for them that's the most normal subconscious thing that they don't even have to think about. But for me, if I say hello, I'm initiating a conversation. If I'm not in a state of mind of having a conversation, and it will be small talk, I don't want to do it. I don't see the point. We'll have a conversation in a bit. other people are saying hi to you and clearly busy. But it's just before discovering all of this about myself, I beat myself up so much for it because I don't want to be rude to people. It's the last thing I want to do, and the last thing I want to do is make people feel bad. And I was, and that's kind of the story of my life is there have been so many instances where I've made people feel not great without meaning to, and I've placed all of the responsibility on myself to fix it. And I don't know if I can in all instances because it's just not how it works for me.
Oh, bless you. That and just hearing you telling that story, the emotion behind it, and thinking, you've not done anything wrong in any way, shape, or form. It's just you're absolutely right. It's I'm doing what I need to do. I will, I will interject and I will speak to that person afterwards. But it is understanding those social cues. It's understanding how to kind of conform in this, and in your my working space, I tend to hyper focus and like ridiculously to a point where I would forget about eating or having a drink. I would literally just almost go into a bit of a zone, and it's very difficult to get myself out of that because I for me. So I'll give you a scenario when my wife's incredible at doing something. So she will give me like like a bit of a countdown or say, oh, well, we're going out in 10 minutes or we're going out in 15 minutes. Now, if I told people that, they're going, well, you're not a child. You don't need to be given a time limit. But the reason that helps is because in my head, I can start thinking to myself, in 20 minutes, I need to start shutting down what I need to work on. Because and it doesn't always happen, don't get me wrong, you can't always just, have that luxury of having that time. But if I know in my head that I can kind of work towards the end of a project or something for the next 20 minutes and close it down, then I can go off and try and focus on something else. If, however, it's just stop, then no matter where I am or what I'm doing, my head is still working. And I know we do this anyway, but it genuinely, I'll still be thinking, I'll do this. And I'm just in a different place. So that we're talking about strategies. Those little things for me kind of just help. Of course, you'll still be thinking about it to a certain extent, but not to the level of pure hyper focus.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's just trying to find a strategy that kind of works for yourself within this side of it. And it is very difficult because you do, if you're talking in a workplace environment, you will have very, different people who are very social, people a little bit more introvert, people that are just task driven and want to kind of just focus on something else. And it is a bit of a mixing pot, isn't it, of people within this. And I guess what the idea of a company culture, if we can use that terminology, is to try and all conform together. But we need to understand each other to be able to do that first, don't we?
Yeah, it's again, me going through this process myself, something that we're exploring in my team. We're quite a small team of about, I think, 4 to 6 of varied roles, and part of figuring out what works best within my team is understanding where my strengths are. And I think that with the training that we give, the neurodiversity training we give, we talk about you sort of want to support people's weaknesses or the weaknesses and things they find difficult, because you want to help them develop, right? So if you're there just there going, I'm not going to give them this task because they struggle. So an example we give is if you've got a staff member who is dyslexic and struggles with writing reports, there's a lot of words or whatever, taking that task away from them and being like, oh, don't worry, you don't need to do it. They're never going to develop in that area. And no matter who you are, and no matter what diagnosis you have, self-diagnosis, official diagnosis, we all do better with practice on everything, right? But it just tends to be a lot more work that goes into doing things that we find difficult because of neurodivergency, for example. So taking a task away that people struggle with is not a good idea, but supporting them in it, finding out what it is that they have difficulty with within that task, and trying to find strategies to support, like a scaffolding of a building, to support that is important. But then really focusing in on their strengths. So what are they really good at? What do they excel at? What gives them life? What lights them up? And letting them take ownership of those aspects of work is really where you sort of want to go. So for me, it's I'm quite creative person. I like to use a lot of creative methods within the work that I do. And I'm also quite a problem solver. So if there's a problem, I start to get really into it. And I'm like, I'm going to fix this. I'm going to find a way of doing it. So for example, we just within my workplace, we launched our neurodiversity network this month. And one of my focuses was looking at the other networks and how within a clinical within a clinical setting, people can and can't attend quite a lot. Like there's no consistency within the NHS. They might get an appointment last minute. A lot of people can't attend those live meetings. And then someone raised the very common aspect of having social anxiety when you're neurodivergent and not being able to speak up, especially in large meetings. And so that challenge of like, how can I make this network accessible to people who can't attend for this reason, to people who don't want to speak up verbally, but they still want to contribute? That put me in that state of like, I'm gonna do this and I'm gonna find a way. And it was really successful and it went really well. But there's a thing called riding the wave for ADHDers, dyslexics, anyone who has a dopamine deficiency. It's finding a thing that gives you dopamine, sparking that up, getting that sort of that energy going within you, and then you can do the tasks that are a little bit more difficult whilst you've still got that dopamine running through your body. So that's why it's so important within a team to sort of go, you're really good at this, you're really good at this, and maybe you can buddy people up as well, and they can sort of learn from each other, and just it's a much more effective strategy. From an employer point of view, is to find out what people are good at and letting them go wild with that essentially, rather than telling people you can't do this, you can't do this, you can't do this thing that I need you to do. And that negative messaging often psychologically makes people worse at their job because they're already defeated. They're like, I can't do this, I'm struggling with this. Whereas if they're like, I'm really good at that, they tend to do better overall at their job because they know that they add value to it, they know that they're needed, and they know that their strengths are really important to the workplace.
I think it's so wonderfully put, and what an incredible thing to do, because I guess notoriously when we talk about someone having this, again using terminology, let's use dyslexia, is the more the what you can't do. And it is, you're absolutely right, it's okay, well, we'll take this off you to make your job better, we'll take this, we'll take this, we'll take this, and then you're just a bit like an empty shell really, and you're thinking, okay, so where is the value that I add? Because there is a huge amount of value I can add into this organization. And you're absolutely right, it is harnessing those strengths. So I think that's a remarkable way of looking at it.
Hmm. Yeah.
I just want to bring in Catherine. Catherine, thank you so much, Catherine, for all your comments. I'm just going to bring one up. Combining the difficulties with task transition with time blindness as well is not fun. I found putting a timer on counting down to the next meeting, lunchtime, and end of shift is helpful. However, when working on a ward in outpatient clinics and needing a visible timer is embarrassing and caused judgment between colleagues to question your overall ability. I guess that if we talk about kind of neurodiversity and neurodiverse and dyslexia, it is hidden to a point where we make a mistake and then it's visual, isn't it? So
Yeah.
that's the tricky part. It is hidden inside, and we think, oh, we'll keep this all inside, but by doing that, our actions then become visible, and then it's very difficult to, I guess, explain that. And quite personal to be able to try and explain it as well. What do you think of
Yeah.
that?
It is scary to talk about these parts of ourselves that we feel like we've had to hide for decades, some of us. It's extremely vulnerable, and you're opening yourself up to unknown judgment. You have no idea how somebody is going to perceive that and whether they believe you as well. I mean, particularly now, there's a lot of stuff in the media and a lot of messages going around, and the I read comments all the time about oh, it's just an excuse, it's just an excuse, and there's the phrase I keep trying to use is it's not an excuse, it's an explanation. And it's just as valid an explanation as any other difficulty, disability, reasoning for not being able to do something because of a health condition. But the sort of the hidden and invisible aspect of it's really is quite interesting because I don't think it is that hidden. There's I've noticed that there's sort of a radar that goes off in my head when I meet another neurodivergent, particularly an ADHD. I know straight away, and I mention it, and like people around me are like, "Oh, everybody, you think everyone is," but they end up they have a diagnosis, and I've clocked it straight away, and you recognize, I guess, parts of yourself in other people, but it's not as invisible as people think. And maybe it's being around certain people. So maybe when they're around me, they sort of let that kind of mask down and they let those aspects out of themselves. I know I certainly gauge kind of the level of myself that I can present to other people within the first couple of minutes, depending on their energy. But these calculations are happening so, so quick for all of us. But it's not, I don't think it is as hidden as we think. But we tend to focus on, yeah, those sort of negative outcomes of when something goes wrong and you're like, oh, now I can see it. It's like, but you're missing all of the other signs that are actually really, really positive. And you're kind of, I think people take them for granted that there are aspects of neurodivergency that are incredibly positively impactful, not just in the workplace, but socially. There's a lot of beautiful things that come from being dyslexic, being ADHD, being autistic, just in your day-to-day interactions with them. There's a lot of honesty and integrity and empathy that comes with it. And I think that again, it's focusing on kind of letting those aspects of people kind of just wash over until something goes wrong. And that's the saddest part of it, really, is that we're not taking into account the full picture of what makes somebody who they are.
Do you think? Thank you for sharing that. And do you think you mentioned the word masking and the fact of the different. Yeah, I feel I have different versions in the sense of the way that I am around my family, my friends, and workplaces, and meetings, and interviews, and all the like interviews in this sense. And there's a different. They use the terminology. Different. I wear different lots of different hats in that sense, but with regards to kind of masking and the kind of the mental well-being of this, I can imagine it just I've experienced this in the past. It can become quite exhausting that we actually have to, I guess, become a different person because we're fearful of hiding something on that side of it. How do you kind of help with, in your experience, around kind of your own kind of well-being to make sure that you can kind of, I guess, recenter yourself, or to try and make sure that your well-being is being looked after?
Um, I think this is a really socially, it's probably one of the biggest difficulties I've had. Well, saying that, employment has as well, but I had a really, really, really bad social like upbringing. So, like, disclosure, I had an autism assessment because there were certain aspects of my social interaction that were very, very similar to sort of autistic traits. And I came back with a non-diagnosis, and it was based on one of the assessments, but they said that I present extremely strongly as autistic. They just think it's from a different cause. And the social side of things was part of it. I'd never, I could never just naturally kind of understand social etiquette in high school. I was very easily overwhelmed. I became really, really conscious of how I was interacting with people and behaving with people in high school. Um, when I noticed, I guess, the negative effect of getting it wrong. And I jumped from social group to social group to social group. And there's this thing I talk about where it's like the first 3 months, or so, seems to be about 3 months of meeting people. I'm hilarious. I'm really funny. I don't tend to feel super negatively about it. I get on with people pretty well. And I wonder, and I'm not, this is the thing, is I'm not aware a great deal of where my masking is and where it isn't. But I'm guessing the first 3 months I'm probably masking fairly heavily, but there's also not a great deal at stake if it doesn't go well when I first meet people. And then as time goes on and I start to understand how these people and this group of people want to interact with each other, what they value, whether it's say banter jokes, which I'm not naturally very good at. I start to, I think, try and do that more and more because I start to think that's how I need to behave in order for them to want to keep me around. And it doesn't work because it's not who I am, and it falls flat. And and I fail essentially at that kind of maintaining that friendship. And that still sits with me now as an adult. And the thing that keeps me kind of not getting too stuck on it in the way that I did in high school, it is still very much present. Um, is reminding myself of the people that are still around. And not just that, but the people who my closest friends, um, the majority of them are neurodivergent. Um, but they express to me that the things that I always thought were problems for me, so I'm very high energy, I get really excitable, all these kind of things that was seen as too much growing up. They're the things that people like my friends value me for. Um, Another thing was I ended up in this field of work because I have a really, really strong sense of justice, and I always have, and I've always been outspoken. I've never been able to keep it in. I've never been able to pick my battles, where people kind of stay quiet and they might disagree, but they kind of like, it's not worth getting involved in. It's too much energy. I can't do that. I have no, it just comes out. And I was picked up on growing up of like, you just have a problem with everything, was, the sort of the idea around it. And teachers would say I could have an argument with a piece of paper. Um, and again, I've ended up in circumstances like this job. I'm here because of that. And the work I do is because of that aspect of myself. And I'm slowly realizing that the people who stick around, they value that aspect of myself, and that really is the only way that I can stop myself getting into just this hole of no one likes me, I'm an awful person, I'm not good enough, is trying to remind myself that it's not just like neutral. It's not like, oh yeah, that's like we don't mind that. Like it doesn't bother us. It's like actively it's a desired trait for some people. And that's it. That's all I can do really.
Thank you so much for sharing that. It's incredibly fascinating. So you mentioned about the kind of the 3 month side of it. So it's almost, and I can relate to so many different things within this, and it's almost like we don't want to show from my point of view, this is show our true selves fully to someone. And you mentioned it, you haven't got anything to lose in this sense because you're not building upon something. So it is almost like we go into something thinking, well, they're not going to. It's not really going to blossom into a big friendship. What they'll see
Mhm.
the funny side or this side of me, and then so we're almost sort of preempting, aren't we? That isn't going to grow, and it's
Yeah.
and the fear of when we actually show who we really are they going to like that person? Are they going to like the fact that we're not as lively or funny or whatever it is that we think? We're all human. We all have days where we can't just continuously be at number top 10. Do you think that's the worry that happens, that if they find there's weakness or if there's something that they wouldn't want to associate with you anymore?
Yeah, so I'm currently going through therapy as from most of us are, and the abandonment fear I have is is massive. It's this idea that if I do something wrong, if I mess up because I consistently have messed up socially, growing up, that I'll just be discarded. Essentially, I'm not going to be. They're not going to want to keep me around and too much effort, and I don't offer enough I guess value on the other side of things to offset that is um what goes around in my head with these interactions, and trying to unlearn that the grace that I give other people I can receive too. Like I see things that people do, and I understand that there's stuff going on for a lot of people, and I try and understand kind of the reasoning behind it. And I also know that again, with the sum of so many different things, and sometimes we don't do the right thing, um, and that's not all that we are. But yeah, if there's not, I think for a lot of us that we don't offer that same grace to ourselves. I know that's a common thing, but I think neurodivergents particularly um, do not think that they deserve that grace because they've been told that you know those negative things throughout their whole life of they're not good enough and they need to do better and all that kind of stuff.
Which is really prevalent, really, because you mentioned, I said we won't do stats, but you mentioned, is it 10,000?
Yeah, yeah. So I think it is by the age of 10, I think it's around 10,000 negative messages is what the research said. Certainly high thousands, yeah, which is just age of
We-
10. Like
So,
I've got a 5-year-old and I'm just looking going, oh God, like when does it start?
so if we talked about sort of kind of self-talk and self-programming in the sense of, when people say, you talk kindly to yourself and you're continuously hearing, being bamboozled by all of this negativity of what is wrong with you and what you do and what you can't do, this and this, up to huge amounts. And, that's up to the age of 10. And then we go, we have to kind of, navigate our way through school, which is not very, not easy in any way, shape or form for anyone, in some aspects, from the work, from the education, from the social groups, from everything else. And then we enter the workplace. You then enter the workplace, I don't know, at the age of 20, 21, 22, after, if you went through the educational side of it, you're already in a situation where your confidence can be at an all-time low. And it only
Mhm.
has to, you're absolutely right. And then it's trying to form friends, trying to form work colleagues and social side of it and carry the work. It can be a kind of a real mixing pot, can it, of trying to, I guess, unwire, I don't know if that's correct terminology, but, undo some of the
Mhm.
negativity that's been pushed towards you. That can be really difficult.
Yeah, it's almost an instinctual reaction, I think, um to react the way that we do. It's definitely unconscious. I know that when I've made mistakes in my current job, I I go into this phase of like, I need to leave. I need to leave. I've messed up too much. They now think that I can't do it. I've had these conversations with my managers. Like they think that I'm like they shouldn't have hired me. They made a mistake, because when we're interviewing, we're putting our best foot forward, and then we're saying that we're really really great at these things, and please hire us. And you're hiding all of the. I find interviews really annoying, to be quite honest, for that exact reason of you're not getting the true version of that person. And obviously we know why it is because we're in competition with everybody else who's interviewing, but you hide that bit. And so when you go into the workplace and you start to struggle, because you've got to put these things in place and these things aren't in place, and you don't know how to cope with them, you don't know what kind of support you're going to get. There's this instinctual urge for me to start again. Just like with socially, like I would start again and start from scratch, try it again, blank slate. And I had to really fight through that with this job. And that was really hard when I started to struggle because I worked for 10 years to try and get this job. I with my education and with other jobs, like implementing equality stuff into whatever it was I did. I was off for a while with ill health and I had a child and I finally got it, and then the same thing was happening, I was struggling, um, and that's where I mean, I was lucky, I'm in an equality team. If there's anyone who's gonna understand this sort of the accommodations and trying to make it work, it's gonna be an equality team, hopefully, um, and I had to really force myself to have incredibly, incredibly difficult and honest conversations about, "I can't do this as it is, and we need to find a way of doing it differently, for me to do my job." And I had to have a lot of encouragement, and I think this is, um, for anyone who's listening who has employees, do not underestimate the value of positive affirmation for neurodivergence, because when they're beating themselves up, which we do quite a lot, and saying, "I can't do this, I'm terrible," the words that you give of like, "You're really good at this thing, like, you're incredible at it, and we want you to stay because we really value this." There's so much power in that, in uplifting people out of very, very dark places and stopping them from running away and being like, "Oh, no," which, yeah, is what I wanna do whenever I do anything wrong.
It's one massive congratulations on all your incredible hard work. And I don't know if we can use terminology congratulations because but I know that from the conversations we had, you worked very hard to be in the position, and then worked equally as hard to be able to to stay within something that your dream job within this side of it. Breaking that pattern can be of job to job to job over a short period because you feel like you've been found out and that's it. They're just talking in the meeting room next and saying, oh, well, we just need
Yeah.
to Darren's not performing, we just need to this, and then you mention, oh, actually, I'm not performing because I have dyslexia or I have this, and it's like, oh, it's another problem, it's another
Mhm.
reason to get rid of me. And it's those scenarios that we have to break. I almost feel it's almost the, the the appreciation and the thank yous from a neurodiverse point of view, from me, I always see it like kind of like the Simon Cowell, like the X Factor. It's almost like you're hanging on to so if anyone's watching, I'm pretty sure he's a judge on a talent show, but he was always kind of someone that they just waited for him to approve. And if they got him with a thumbs up, or they said, you've done a good job, they go wild. They almost, oh my God, it's amazing. And it's sad in a way that we have to feel in that way to want that approval and that appreciation. But it does feel like that sometimes, and by certain people, and they say certain things, but when he says it, or that person in the office is the equivalent, I guess, it can make a massive difference, can that?
Yeah, it's incredible, the difference it makes just being recognized. And I think it's a massive challenge for a lot of us and a lot of us are working through it, to not seek that external validation. But I don't know genuinely if I'm ever gonna get to at any point in my life where I don't need that. I think it's just those crucial years growing up where we're kind of figuring out who we are, and how where we fit in the world. We just had the opposite of that for so long. I don't know if I'll ever get to a point where I don't need that. And I think, to be honest, I don't think it's a bad thing for everyone to practice giving that out. Like, just give out the congratulations, give out the really great job, love that, give out the compliments. I don't think it's a bad thing. Again, that's another, it's like it's a barrier, I suppose, like in some senses, that for some people, they might think, "Oh, well, I can't, give them all of these compliments, say that, because it's not gonna push them, and they're gonna rest on their laurels, and blah, 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 and I've got to be seen as the manager who is, stoic, and all this kind of stuff." But actually, if you start gearing towards showing that appreciation quite readily, and just giving it out, I think that that would have a monumental positive effect on everybody in the workplace. I mean, I think there is research out there that says that it does actually improve work output. The more, well, we know positive affirmation, or positive reinforcement is far more effective than negative reinforcement. I think the majority of studies are in maybe children and people in education, but I think it's the same thing applies, as people do better when they have positive messages of what they do well, rather than a negative of what they don't do well.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. And you know, being kind, being considerate, understanding people, thanking them, and is I guess that's the beauty of being human. And I guess that's why we should definitely all be working towards doing this. Coral, it's come to the end of our conversation. That's flown by. But thank you so much for being an absolute incredible guest on here. And again, for all the incredible work that you're doing for the community. And I wish you the very, very best in your future
Thank
endeavors
you very
within this.
much.
But thank you so
Thank
much.
you. Thank you for having me.
You're most
Thanks.
welcome. It's been incredible speaking to you. Have a great rest of the day and a lovely weekend. And we'll speak to you very soon. Thank you, Coral.
Okay. Bye.
So, guys, that was Coral. Absolutely phenomenal guest. Just shared her story and the incredible work that she's doing within her organization. Thank you so much, as always, for all the people that watch this live. If you watch this on the replay, then again, please do let us know where you're tuning in from, and we'll be back soon with another Neurodiversity Stories. Take care, guys. Speak to you soon. Cheers. Bye-bye.